Adamma woke to the sound of roosters and the rustle of morning wind slipping through the cracks of her grandmother's hut. The ground was cold, the sky pale, and the dreams of the night distant. She swung her legs off the bed, and her feet met the one thing that reminded her she didn't belong: the shoes, if you could even call them that. The left one had a sole stitched from palm thread, and the right heel was lopsided. Her grandmother had done her best to patch them after Adamma grew out of her last proper pair. Still, they barely held together, like paper floating in water. Adamma walked to the stream with her broom, sweeping the roadside path as she did every morning. She greeted passers-by with soft, good mornings. Some nodded. Most just looked away. The girls from the upper hills passed by, laughing in pairs, silk skirts brushing the dirt. They didn't see Adamma, or pretended not to, until one of them, Kambili, the trader's daughter, made a sharp comment. Shoes like that should be buried, not worn. The others erupted in laughter. Adamma kept sweeping, quietly, carefully, as if the wind hadn't just slapped her across the face. Her grandmother, Mama Ifeoma, waited on the porch when she returned. "You don't answer foolish tongues with fire," she said gently. "You walk with dignity. One day, they'll see." But even Mama Ifeoma couldn't ignore the royal posters going up across the village. Prince Zubri was coming, the kingdom's heir, to choose a bride, and the chosen girls, all from noble homes. Adamma's name, nowhere on the list. Still, Mama Ifeoma whispered, "You'll go." Adamma blinked. "How?" Mama Ifeoma just smiled and said, "Even broken shoes can carry destiny, if the girl inside them believes." The sun had barely risen when I tied the cloth around my waist and stepped outside with my broom. The morning dust clung to my legs as I swept the path leading to the market. It was quiet, except for the sound of my footsteps. Soft and uneven, thanks to the worn-out shoes I had stitched together with grass and thread. My name is Adamma, and these shoes have walked with me through more shame than distance. I live with my grandmother, Mama Ifeoma, in a crooked clay hut on the edge of the village. My parents died in the same storm that brought down the old palm grove when I was a child. Since then, Mama's been both my sky and my shelter. Her hands are tired now, her knees always aching. So I do the sweeping, I do the carrying, I do the smiling, even when it hurts. The shoes barely fit anymore. The left one flaps like a bird's broken wing, but they're all I have. In the market, I collect vegetable scraps from generous vendors and sweep their stalls for coins. Most just ignore me. Others pretend they don't see me. But some go out of their way to make sure I never forget my place. Kambili, for instance. She walks like her father owns the earth and the sun too. Her dresses are stitched in bright colours, and her voice carries like a bell that wants to break windows. She never calls me by name. "Dust girl," she said yesterday, laughing with her friends as I bent down to pick up rotting plantains. "Maybe if your shoes weren't crying, someone might actually look at you." They all laughed. Even the fruit seller joined in. I didn't say a word. I just kept sweeping, even though my throat felt full of stones. Later that evening, as I helped Mama Ifeoma prepare cassava, the drummers came through the village, banging on iron and wood, announcing the news that made every heart race. The prince was coming, Prince Zuberi. He would arrive within days, they said, to meet and possibly choose a bride from among the noble girls of the land. Mama looked at me with calm eyes. "The girls will line up like new harvest," she murmured, "but some fruits ripen in silence." I looked down at my shoes, frayed, split, clinging to my feet like they had nowhere else to go. I whispered, "He won't even see me." Mama Ifeoma touched my cheek. "Child, it's not always about being seen. Sometimes it's about walking in anyway." The next morning, A town crier's voice echoed through the village, followed by the steady beat of ceremonial drums. People spilled out of their homes, eyes wide, hearts curious. At the centre of the square, the village elders gathered beneath the baobab tree. Their robes were thick with dye and tradition, and their faces held the weight of decisions already made. The chief elder, Papa Onwara, stepped forward, voice loud and slow. By royal decree, Prince Zuberi, heir to the golden throne, shall visit our village in 3 days' time. A feast will be held. A gathering will take place at the palace courtyard. There, the noble daughters of this village will be presented. The word noble hung in the air like smoke. Around me, the other girls began to whisper and giggle. I could already see Kambili clapping her hands in delight, her eyes gleaming like polished stones. Her father, a wealthy cloth trader, immediately announced that her gown would be sewn from imported silk. The shoemaker was summoned. By sundown, girls were lining up outside the tailor's hut with their mothers, measuring their wrists and waists, choosing colours they thought would catch a prince's gaze. No one looked my way. That afternoon, I helped Mama Ifeoma gather herbs behind the hut when a shadow fell over us. It was the elder's wife, wrapped in coral beads and thick cloth. She didn't greet us. She didn't even smile. "Let's not embarrass ourselves, she said, looking straight at me. "This is a royal event, not a parade for the barefoot." Mama's hands stilled over the basket. My chest burned. "She has clothes," Mama said softly. "She has rags," the woman snapped, "and shoes made of weeds. Prince Zubri is not coming for the shoeless." And with that, she turned and walked away. We sat in silence for a long moment. The basket lay forgotten in the dust. I tried to laugh. "She's right, Mama. I don't belong there." Mama didn't answer at first. Then she looked at me with a fierceness I hadn't seen in years. "You will go," she said, eyes steady. "Not for them. For you." "But I wasn't invited." "You don't need an invitation to exist, or to stand tall." I looked at my shoes, one of them now unravelling at the heel. I felt small, smaller than ever. Mama leaned closer. "You may walk in with cracked soles, Adamma, but if your spirit is whole, they won't forget you." That night, I sat by the fire, the silence loud in my ears, and I wondered, if I walked into the royal gathering as I was, would anyone see the girl behind the shoes, or would they just laugh louder? I sat under the moonlight, the wind whispering through the dry palm fronds above me. The laughter from earlier still rang in my ears, high-pitched, sharp, and cruel. My fingers trembled as I picked up the torn pieces of my shoes, staring at the place where the heel had finally given out. The elder's wife had said I didn't belong, that I wasn't meant to be seen. But Mama Ifeoma's words echoed louder. "You may walk in with cracked soles, but if your spirit is whole." I reached for the palm thread she kept in the gourd by the hearth. It was scratchy and uneven, but strong. I began to weave, slowly, methodically. My fingers worked long into the night, binding the broken leather with woven grass and thread. Stitch by stitch, I poured into them every shameful word, every hidden tear, every swallowed reply. By the time the rooster crowed, the shoes weren't new, but they were whole. Mama Ifeoma stood at the doorway watching. She said nothing, but I saw her nod. I rose and walked to the old chest by her bed. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was my mother's only wrapper, plain, cotton, the colour of the morning sky. "May I?" I asked. Mama Ifeoma's lips curved, just slightly. "She would want you too." I unfolded it gently, pressing each line with my hands, smoothing out years of sorrow. The wrapper still smelled like wood smoke and wildflowers. That morning, I walked barefoot to the river. The villagers were busy polishing their bangles and testing perfumes. No one saw me leave. I reached the riverbank, the sun just rising. I stepped into the water, let it touch my ankles, my knees, my fingers. I bathed slowly, careful to clean not just my skin, but the shame others had tried to paste onto it. When I stepped out, I wrapped my mother's cloth tightly around me, then sat on a rock to dry my feet. And finally, I slipped my shoes on, patched, grass-stitched, but standing. As I turned to leave, Mama Ifeoma appeared on the path, holding something in her hand, a necklace, its chain worn thin, the pendant dull from time. "This," she said softly, "belonged to your mother. She wore it when she met your father, when she stood up to the king's men, when she refused to kneel for a bribe." I looked down at the tiny pendant, a carved sunflower, its petals chipped. "May it carry you further than footsteps ever could," she whispered, clasping it around my neck. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I simply nodded, swallowed the lump in my throat, and straightened my back. If they would not invite me in, then I would walk in anyway. Not with shame, but with memory stitched into every step. The village square buzzed with excitement. Women fluttered like birds in bright wrappers, their bangles clinking like festival drums. Men straightened their tunics and murmured about the prince's wealth, his rumoured beauty, his power. But it was the daughters who stood in the centre, lined up like painted dolls, wrapped in silks, their shoes gleaming like polished mirrors. And then I walked in. My feet didn't make much noise, but heads turned anyway. The wind tugged gently at my mother's wrapper, and the grass-stitched shoes thudded softly against the red earth. I kept my eyes forward, my hands clasped in front of me, the pendant at my neck warm from the morning sun. Kambili spotted me first. She tilted her head and gasped loud enough for everyone to hear. "Well, well, well," she drawled, turning to her group with a wicked smile. "The dust girls come to beg for leftovers." A ripple of laughter passed through the girls. One of them sneered. "Maybe she thought this was a charity line." Another leaned in to whisper, "Look at that scarf. Did she iron it with her hands?" I kept walking, steady. My breath caught for a moment, but I didn't stop. I didn't return their stares. I didn't defend myself. Mama Ifeoma had warned me. People mock what they fear, and they fear what they don't understand. Still, it stung. The village chief, seated under the shaded canopy with the elders, noticed the laughter. His eyes narrowed as he glanced my way. He leaned over and muttered to a palace guard beside him. The guard looked up at me, then back to the chief, and nodded slightly. I saw it. They didn't want me here. To them, I wasn't noble, or chosen, or worthy of standing beside satin and gold. I was a blemish on their celebration, a poor girl in patched shoes trying to breathe among queens. I took my place behind the line of girls. The dust clung to my hem. My heartbeat thudded louder than the crowd, and then the drums rolled. Every head turned. Down the main road came the royal convoy, long horses with crimson feathers, warriors in gold-plated robes, and at the centre, a golden carriage pulled by 2 white oxen, each horn capped in silver. The music rose, swelling like a tide, trumpets, drums, the deep rumble of anticipation. The carriage slowed as it reached the square. The crowd held its breath. The girls adjusted their necklaces, lifted their chins. Then the door opened. A hush fell across the entire village, and Prince Zuberi stepped out, tall, calm, robes dark as storm clouds, eyes sharp as lightning, and without a word. He began to walk, not towards the silk and perfume, but slowly, steadily, toward me. The golden carriage came to a final graceful halt at the edge of the square. The horses stilled. The drummers stopped. For a breathless moment, the village froze, a single heartbeat held in suspense. Dust settled like glitter in the air. And then the door opened. Prince Zuberi emerged, tall and composed, his royal cloak trailing behind him like dusk chasing the sun. His skin shimmered under the morning light, dark and radiant, and his presence sent a ripple through the crowd, a wave of awe, of admiration, and of hope. He took one step forward, and the girls lined up in their jeweled perfection, straightened their backs as if on command. Kambili adjusted her necklace, forcing a smile that strained her cheeks. The girl beside her fluttered her eyelashes like a hummingbird. Another curtsied so deeply it looked like she might faint. But Prince Zuberi's gaze didn't pause. Not once. He walked past the silks, past the perfumes, past Kambili, whose smile twitched, then faltered, then dropped completely. And then he stopped, in front of me. Everything blurred. The noise, the colour, the weight of 100 stares. Only he remained clear. He looked at me, not through me, not around me, but at me. My breath caught. I lowered my gaze instinctively, unsure whether to bow or vanish. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Where did you find such shoes?" A hush fell again. Every ear strained. Every heart in the square seemed to lurch forward. My mouth opened, but no words came. My hands curled into my wrapper. My gaze stayed on the dust. But he didn't move. He didn't turn away. Instead, Prince Zuberi did something no one expected. He bent down on one knee before me. The gasp that moved through the crowd was almost violent. Even the drums seemed to tremble. He reached forward, not to touch, but simply to look. "These," he said, studying the patched grass and rough stitching, "were not made to impress. They were made to endure." I looked at him then. I had to. His eyes were kind, steady, deep like water with stories beneath its surface. He smiled. Not a princely smile, but a real one. "I've walked in palaces and parliaments," he said softly, "but I've never seen such honest souls." My throat burned. I couldn't tell if it was shame, pride, or something new, something I'd never been allowed to feel before. He rose slowly, his eyes never leaving mine. Behind him, the line of noble daughters shifted uncomfortably. Kambili looked as if she'd swallowed coal. And me, I just stood there, shoes stitched with silence and survival, holding the gaze of a prince. For the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't just being seen, I was being understood. The silence still lingered in the air as Prince Zuberi stepped back, hands clasped behind him. He turned slowly to face the elders, the villagers, the girls still lined up, their gowns gleaming, their shoes untouched by dirt, their eyes wide with confusion. "I have heard many tales," he said, his voice steady, carrying across the square without effort, "of beauty, of wealth, of status. But today, I wish to see something else." He raised a hand, and one of his guards brought forward a small wooden stool and placed it at the center of the open courtyard. Upon it, the prince carefully set a simple clay bowl filled to the brim with water, the surface still, trembling ever so slightly in the breeze. "This," he said, "is the test. Each of you will take this bowl and walk across the courtyard. If a single drop spills, you may return to your place." The girls gasped. Some laughed nervously. Kambili stepped forward, confident as ever. "This is a game," she said lightly. But the prince did not smile. "One by one," he said, "let the steps show what the eyes cannot." The first girl, adorned in coral beads, lifted the bowl with grace, but halfway across the square, she stumbled as her anklet twisted. Water spilled, and she blushed furiously as she returned. The second walked slowly, but her hands trembled. Another spill. Kambili stepped up next, chin high. She lifted the bowl with exaggerated poise and strutted like the square was her runway. The villagers murmured, but her pride betrayed her. Halfway through, a gust of wind caught her scarf and she reached to fix it. The bowl tilted. A splash. Another failure. Her face fell. Her lips tightened. But she said nothing as she handed the bowl back and stepped aside. Finally, it was my turn. I moved slowly to the stool, heart thudding. The bowl felt heavier than I expected. Not from weight, but from meaning. I took a breath and stepped forward. One step. Another. I did not look at the crowd. I did not rush. I did not try to impress. I simply walked. I thought of Mama Ifeoma's hands, steady as she stirred yam. I thought of my mother's scarf, soft against my neck. I thought of silence, not the silence of shame, but of strength. When I reached the other side, not a single drop had spilled. The crowd exhaled. Even the birds in the trees seemed to pause. Prince Zuberi smiled, quiet pride in his eyes. He turned to face the village and spoke, not loudly, but clearly. "The one who walks with humility," he said, looking at me, "walks with grace." And in that moment, my patched shoes, the very ones they mocked, had become something else entirely. Proof that sometimes the most balanced step is taken not in gold, but in courage. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting long shadows across the square. Whispers floated like dust in the air, clinging to every ear. But the crowd stilled again as another royal carriage arrived, this one smaller, adorned in deep purple and ivory feathers. From it stepped a woman whose presence quieted even the wind. Queen Mother Adamma. She was graceful, regal, and carried the weight of generations in her gaze. Her eyes scanned the square, not searching for beauty, but for something deeper. She approached slowly, her robes gliding over the ground like silk water. When she reached Prince Zuberi's side, she didn't smile. She simply looked at him and asked, "What did you find?" The prince gestured toward me. "I found what the others chose not to see." Her eyes followed his hand, and then locked on mine. There was a flicker in her expression, recognition, curiosity. I couldn't tell. She turned to the village elders. "Who is she?" Papa Onwara stepped forward, his voice too quick. "A poor girl, Majesty. No father. Her mother—" "Her name," the Queen Mother interrupted, "is Adamma," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. The Queen Mother took a few steps closer. She looked at me long and hard, then at the pendant resting just above my heart. "Where did you get that necklace?" she asked softly. "It belonged to my mother," I replied. "Mama Ifeoma gave it to me this morning." "What was your mother's name?" "Amara." That name seemed to ripple through her like a sudden breeze. She turned sharply to the elders. "You didn't mention a girl named Adamma. You didn't mention Amara. Why?" The elders shifted nervously. Finally, one of them muttered, "Her mother helped the former king once, during the rebellion. She led villagers to safety, but she later refused to bow to the council's demands. She was shunned," another added quickly. "She rejected a noble match, lived quietly, married a traveller, didn't want titles." The Queen Mother's voice dropped, not in weakness, but in fury. "She saved my husband's life," she said, "and you erased her." No one spoke. Queen Mother Adamma turned back to me. "May I see the pendant?" I hesitated, then unclasped it and placed it in her hand. She examined the back carefully, then pressed a tiny groove at the base. With a soft click, the pendant opened, revealing a miniature royal seal hidden within. A gasp exploded from the crowd. The seal was unmistakable, the mark of the royal house. "She's from the forgotten line," someone cried. Another voice, "She carries royal blood." The Queen Mother nodded slowly, closing the pendant and handing it back to me. "You are not just seen," she said, her voice deep and warm. "You are remembered. And in that instant, everything shifted. I was no longer the girl in patched shoes. I was the daughter of a woman who had once saved a king, and whose memory refused to stay buried. The weight of silence after the revelation was heavier than any drumbeat. Faces once twisted in mockery, now flushed with unease. Even the village chief looked smaller beneath his ceremonial robe, as if the truth had peeled away his title and left only a man clinging to power. Prince Zuberi stepped forward, eyes fixed on the elders. "You erased her," he said, his voice a sharp echo, not because she lacked merit, but because her family lacked favor. The elders fidgeted, robes rustling like dry leaves. Papa Onwara opened his mouth, then closed it. Another elder cleared his throat as if he might speak, but said nothing. "You speak of tradition," the prince continued, "but what tradition hides a woman who saved a king? What custom turns its back on dignity and strength?" No answer came. Kambili, still standing among the line of jeweled girls, couldn't hold her tongue any longer. "She didn't belong," she said, defiant. "She showed up looking like a stray. We didn't know who she was." The prince turned to her, slow and calm. "And yet you mocked her, not for her words, not for her actions, but for her shoes." Kambili's face burned. "It was just a joke." "No," the prince interrupted, stepping closer. "It was a lesson, and you failed it." She looked down. "What you wear," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "is not who you are." Then he turned to me. "Adamma," he said gently. "They see you now. But do they understand?" The Queen Mother stepped aside. "Speak," she said, "if you wish to." I stepped forward slowly, my heartbeat louder than the murmurs. I looked at the villagers, the same ones who had turned away when I needed them most, the same ones who laughed. I didn't speak with anger. I didn't need to. "You didn't fail me," I said, my voice steady. "You failed yourselves, not by mocking my shoes, but by never looking beyond them." A breeze stirred the pendant at my neck. I touched it lightly. "You saw patched soles and thought it meant I was small, but these shoes walked through storms. They held together when everything else fell apart. And still, I walked." A woman in the crowd began to cry softly. A man lowered his head. You looked at me and saw only silence, but sometimes the ones who say the least carry the most. I paused. "Next time you laugh at someone's shoes," I said, "make sure they're not the ones carrying the future." There was no applause, no cheers, just silence, the kind that follows a truth no one wants to admit, but everyone finally hears. And in that silence, something shifted in the soil of the village. Not just a reckoning, but a quiet beginning. That evening, the village transformed. The same square where laughter once echoed now pulsed with music, lanterns, and the scent of roasted yams and spices. Drums beat not with judgment, but with celebration. For once, the night didn't belong to the noble daughters or jeweled guests. It belonged to me, but not just me. It belonged to every girl who had been told she didn't fit into the story, whose name had been left off the scroll, whose shoes had been stitched instead of shined. At the center of it all, the prince stood beneath the baobab tree, flanked by warriors and elders now humbled, but his gaze kept drifting, not to the feasting guests, not to the girls who still wore their wealth like armor, but to me. "Tonight," he declared, raising his voice above the rhythm of the drums, "we honor not only my visit, but the strength of someone your history tried to bury. We honor Adamma, daughter of Amara, granddaughter of Ifeoma, a girl of dignity, of quiet defiance, and of footsteps that carried the weight of grace." Cheers erupted, a roar of clapping. But my heart beat slower than the sound. because I wasn't thinking of honor or applause. I was thinking of my mother and the way she used to dance, barefoot in front of the fire, when the world was kind and the nights were warm. She had always said the earth listens best when your feet touch it raw. So I bent down and slipped off my shoes. The crowd hushed as I stepped forward, my feet bare against the same red clay that had once made me feel invisible. But now, it welcomed me. The dust rose like incense beneath every step. The drummers caught my rhythm, and I danced. Not like royalty, not like a performer. I danced like a girl who had survived laughter, walked through silence, and now moved with purpose. My arms rose like branches, my hips swayed like rivers, and the stories in my bones came alive. The Queen Mother leaned toward Prince Zuberi, her eyes soft. "She carries more royalty than robes ever could," she whispered. And then, something unexpected happened. One by one, village women stepped forward. The same women who once looked past me, the same ones who never invited me to their circles. They began removing their slippers, their sandals, their decorated shoes, and placing them in a circle around me. A silent offering, a sign of apology, a symbol of respect. Kambili's mother was the first, then the fruit seller, then a girl I didn't even know the name of, but who once joined in the mocking. They placed their shoes gently, as if to say, "We're sorry. We see you now." I kept dancing, not above them, but with them, because the girl they once tried to keep out of the circle had become its center. The morning after the feast, I woke to the sound of birdsong and soft knocking on the hut's door. Mama Ifeoma opened it to find a royal messenger standing tall, scroll in hand. By royal invitation, I was summoned to the capital, to study at the palace court, to learn from royal tutors, to prepare for a life among nobility. The village buzzed with pride. Some whispered that I might become queen. Others dreamed of new markets and bridges, now that one of ours had been chosen. But I looked around at the huts, at the girls who still swept paths with calloused hands, at the younger ones who walked barefoot, eyes wide with hunger for something they couldn't name. I thought of how many had been left off the list, how many never even had a chance to dream. So I thanked the royal family with a bow, and I said no. Instead, I asked for something else: land. Just a small parcel by the riverside where the wild palms grew. And there, with the help of Mama Ifeoma, the Queen Mother, and even Prince Zuberi, we built it, the house of many steps, a school not made for noble names, but for brave ones, for dusty feet and patched souls, for the girls no one had ever called chosen until now. Years passed. We taught reading and sewing, numbers and music, but mostly we taught dignity, how to carry it even when the world tried to strip it away. One rainy afternoon, as I stood under the awning, I saw someone approach the gate. It was Kambili. She didn't wear silk this time. No bangles, no sneer, just plain clothes and quiet eyes. She asked if she could help. I looked at her, at the humility in her stance, and nodded. "There are always more girls than hands," I said, "and hands are welcome here." She didn't thank me. She just followed me into the school, rolled up her sleeves, and began. And I never brought up the past. I didn't need to. The girls brought their own stories now. One day, I stood before a small class of 10, a new generation. One girl, maybe 7 years old, wore sandals so patched they barely clung to her feet. She looked at them with embarrassment, tugging her skirt down to hide them. I knelt beside her, touching her shoulder gently. "Don't worry about the shoes, child," I said with a smile. "Just walk forward. The world will follow." And she did, one step, then another. Behind her, the others joined, one by one, a line of hope rising from the dust. Voiceover. They laughed at her shoes, but she left footsteps they still follow today. And in those footsteps, a kingdom learned to walk differently.